Hello and welcome back, everybody, to another AK Ghost ASMR video. Thank you so much for the likes and the subs and the comments on the last video and the videos from before. It means a lot to me. And let's get right into today's true crime video. If you already don't know who's on your screen, this is going to be the case of Thomas Lee, the Ohio outdoorsman killer. Alright, let's get right into this video. Okay, southern Ohio's rural countries, with their rocky and wide open spaces, are perfect for outdoor recreation. Many residents and visitors take advantage of the wilderness during hunting and fishing seasons. These counties were at one time a place where residents would leave their doors unlocked at night, and violent crimes were considered a big problem in big cities. But that began to change in the spring of 1989. Beginning on April 1st, 1989, and continuing until April 1992, serial killer Tom Lee Dillon killed at least 5 people and possibly as many as 11 victims, enjoying the outdoors in random, motiveless attacks. He would ruthlessly kill hunters, fishermen, joggers with weapons like his high-velocity .308 Mauser rifle. That's what it looked like. Investigators were bewildered by the senseless killings, and after interviewing and polygraphing friends, family members, and acquaintances, they were even more baffled. Alright, so who was Thomas Lee? To begin with, Thomas Lee was born in Canton, Stark County, northeastern Ohio, July 9, 1950. His father succumbed to Hodgkin's disease and died when he was just 15 months old. Psychologist Jeffrey said that Dillon viewed his mother as a cold woman who never praised or punished him. Dillon has no memories of his mother ever hugging, kissing him, or telling him she loved him. He said during the murders, Dillon worked as a draftsman for municipal water department in Canton for 22 years. He was a husband and father and lived a quiet life in a middle-class ranch house in southern Stark County, Pike Township. The Dillons were described as a very close-knit family. Classmates remembered Dillon as extremely intelligent, but a loner with few friends. His 1968 yearbook lists no extracurricular activities. Tom was removed from the group as a classmate, Ron Skelton. He was a person who marched to the beat of a different drummer, separated from the mainstream, another classmate said. And Dillon would take trips into the backwoods of Ohio alone, to stop on his way to buy beer, and often drive hundreds of miles, immersed in his thoughts, dreaming of he was a special forces soldier out hunting for enemy combatants. What no one knew for 3 years during the late 1980s and early 1990s was that his fantasy had become reality. In his teenage years, Dillon began keeping count of the animals he killed on a calendar in his bedroom of his family home on 37th Street Northwest in Canton, and also kept a calendar for all the girls he'd had sex with. Following high school, Dillon attended Kent State University's Stark campus and later Ohio State University. The animal killings continued after Dillon graduated from Ohio State in 1972, went to work for the Canton Water Department, and married Catherine Elsis, a nurse from Alliance. In 1978, by the early 80s, Dillon was boasting that the count on the death calendar had reached 500, and he would use his rifle. Dillon had a passion for weapons, and according to his friend and fellow hunter Richard Fry, he was always changing guns. When Dillon occasionally bought weapons at gun shows, most came from private sales through classified ads and mail orders from gun dealers. Fry said Dillon almost always carried weapons, even when he rode a bike. He just didn't collect guns. Dillon fired about 1,000 rounds a year in a target practice, so much that he damaged his hearing. He also used a crossbow. Despite all the practice, Fry said Dillon was a mediocre marksman, especially when the target was living. He seemed to get a physical thrill out of killing, according to Fry, who recalled Dillon once used a knife to finish off a wounded groundhog. He was shaking. He was in a frenzy, wild-eyed. Dillon didn't have any qualms about talking about animal killings. In the late 70s, early 80s, Dillon would sometimes take dead animals home. Fry said, "I can remember one pretty good-looking German Shepherd. It still had arrows stuck in him. Dillon would talk about grossing people out at work with his tales of killing, and didn't seem to understand why people would find the stories disturbing. Nor did Dillon understand why anyone would object to how he teased Fry's son. Once in the mid-1980s, when the boy was 5 or 6, Dillon shot a chipmunk under their backyard grill. The boy was nearby. He was curious, said Fry. Dillon grabbed the dead animal and began chasing his son around the yard until he fell and tripped, and then he ground that chipmunk in his face. Yo, this guy was sick as hell for that shit. By the mid-80s, Dillon's activities had attracted attention near home, and one man said he had complained to police because Dillon had killed his dog. Except for a minor disciplinary action for tardiness and absenteeism in the 70s, Dillon's 22-year work record was good. His supervisor at the Municipal Water Department, J.D. Williams, in a letter to Dillon's attorney after his arrest, said, "Tom is a dedicated and knowledgeable employee, and these qualities are reflected in his work. He gets along with everyone, and his attitude is always positive." In 1969, while he was a student at Ohio State, Dillon was investigated for possessing an antique Russian mortar. Authorities decided not to press charges after determining that the mortar was more of a collector's item than a weapon. Dillon was also knowledgeable about police procedures. In 1980s, he attended Ohio Peace Officers Training in Lawrence Township in Stark County, doing well in the course and graduating with an expert rating in marksmanship. In 1991 of August, Dillon was cited by a game warden for illegal target practicing near a state hunting area in southern Stark County. Target shooting is a misdemeanor, and he was fined $200 in Canton Municipal Court. Then, in search of his pickup truck, the warden seized a .22 caliber pistol with a silencer, and he was then indicted on federal charges of possessing an illegal silencer. Dillon's attorney Seinberg at the time said he was optimistic that his client wouldn't serve jail time because he had promised in the plea bargain to get rid of his weapon and not buy any more. Seinberg wrote in motion requesting leniency that portrayed Dillon as an avid, lifelong gun enthusiast who made mistakes but presented no threat to society. This was before the killings, by the way. So, let's get into them. So, first one, Donald Welling. Around April 1st, 9:30 in the morning, Donald Welling, 35 years old, was jogging on Back Road in Tuscaloosa County, near New Philadelphia, a quiet community about 100 miles south of Cleveland, Ohio. Suddenly, a vehicle approached him and he was shot at point-blank range. Thomas Dillon was driving the car, and he put a .30 caliber rifle bullet through Donald's heart from approximately 10 feet away. At the time, the authorities could not find a motive or any evidence to help them solve the murder. Dillon said, this is what he said to Donald before shooting. He said, "What's up?" And then just shot him. Just from me to you, just 5 feet away. This guy was just trying to be friendly, and he blew you. And he blew, I killed him. It wasn't premeditated. I told you guys that. Just, I was driving along and came up on him, and that's it. Donald Welling, and just heard, and this is what Dillon's saying right now. He's like, I heard a voice in my head that said, open fire on him, and he did. And in 10 seconds from the time I heard that voice till I shot him and killed him. So, damn. So he has this impulse, right off rip. It's like a voice. He didn't even second guess it. Next up is Jamie Paxton, 21 years old, was hunting outside. He was hunting outside St. Clairsville, an Ohio community near the state border with West Virginia on Saturday, November 10, 1990. Ohio's annual bow hunting season was in full swing, and Jamie headed out into the cold morning to try and bag a deer. Jamie lived with his parents in Bangor County, Ohio. Following breakfast just before 7 o'clock, he headed out the door with his crossbow, said goodbye to his mother, Jean Paxton, and father, Mickey, and was never seen alive again. Jean had expected her son by mid-afternoon, but then 2:40, as Jean went about her household chores, a sheriff's car pulled up at the house. Jamie had been found by his friends on a bushy hillside along Route 9, dead from apparent rifle bullet wounds to his chest, right knee, and buttocks. Sheriff Tom McCourt knew that this was no accident. When we saw more than one wound, we knew it could not be an accident. Plus, it was a bullet rather than an arrow, and gun season was not in yet. But the killer had left no clues behind. So next was 30-year-old Kevin Loring of Massachusetts, hunted in Moxon County, west of Belmont County. He was a refrigerator technician who was married, and a single gunshot wound to the face had murdered the father of 3 children. He'd been hunting deer in a strip mine area. So the murder of Loring, it had been deemed a hunting accident at the time. I couldn't find any pictures of him. So next up is victim was Cloud Hawkins. On Saturday, March 14th, 1992, Hawkins, 49 years old, father of 4 children, decided to do some early morning fishing after finishing his midnight shift at Pittsburgh Plate and Glass Company. Hawkins loved fishing and had a favorite spot just below Wills Creek Dam, northwest of Belmont, Ohio. In Ogden County, he was found dead, shot in the back at close range. Since the murder was committed on federal land, the FBI was called in. Special Agent Harry Trumbitis from Columbus Field Office was one of the officers assigned to the case. Usually you would find some type of shell casing in the area. I remember looking very hard, metal detectors, hands and knees for any shell casings, and that none were ever found. And so that was something that, if in fact we had somebody who was evidence conscious enough to pick up the shell casing after they shot it and killed somebody, we were dealing with a different brand of person here. So Dillon said after his arrest, I drove by and he waved at me. I heard a voice that day that said, go back and get him. I saw him fishing down there. I heard a voice in my head and said go back and get him. Went down there and killed him. Shot him right in the back. End quote. Damn, this guy, he has no impulse control whatsoever. And then Gary Bradley, I don't have a picture of him. On April 5th, 1992, he was a West Virginia resident and father of 3 children. Gary Bradley was fishing near the county seat of Noble County when Dillon shot him. Dillon was also investigated in the connection with with the unsolved shooting and death of John Joseph Harvat on November 28 at a hunting cabin in Wetmore Township. What you have here is a hunter of humans, said a noted forensic psychiatrist who has been involved in such celebrated cases such as Ted Bundy, Jack Ruby. Whoever killed the outdoorsman did it for his own satisfaction and pleasure. Alright, so we're gonna get to the investigations and the efforts of Jean Paxton. So Jean Paxton was Jamie Paxton's mother. Jamie Paxton's mother. So police found little or no evidence at the murder scenes because he left no casings, no other evidence, and most importantly, no witnesses. A short time after Jamie's murder, Jean Paxton began She began a letter writing campaign, sending letters to the killer via Martins Ferry Times Leader newspaper saying, "To the murderer of my son Jamie, would it be easier for you if I wrote words of hate? I can't because I don't feel hate. I feel deep sorrow at losing my son. You took away a light from my life on November 10 and left me with many days of darkness. Have you thought of your death? Unless you confess your sin and ask for God's forgiveness, you will face the fire and fury of hell." So that's what she kind of wrote in the paper, trying to call him out. Investigators told her that she would probably not, the killer would not reply or anything but she kept persisting, and she wrote again in October 1991, saying, "It's been nearly a year since you killed my son. Has your life changed in the past 11 months? Our family hasn't lived since November 10. We are surviving one day at a time. There is one question on all our minds all day long, and every time we wake up at night, we want to know why Jamie was killed." Jean's perseverance finally pays off. Dillon sends an anonymous typed letter addressed to the local newspaper at the Times Leader, Sheriff McCourt, and the Paxtons. It had been posted from outside the Martins Ferry post office. Alright, so the letter said, "I am the murderer of Jamie Paxton. Jamie Paxton was a stranger to me. I never saw him before in my life, and he never said a word to me that Saturday. Paxton was killed because of an irresistible compulsion that has taken over my life. I knew when I left my house that day that someone would die by my hand. I just didn't know who or where. Technically, I meet the definition of a serial killer. But I'm an average-looking person with a family, job, and home, just like yourself. Something in my head causes me to turn into a merciless killer with no conscience. To the Paxtons, you deserve to know the details. I was very drunk and had a voice in my head said, 'Do it.' I stopped my car behind Jamie's and got out. Jamie started walking very slowly down a hill toward the road. He appeared to be looking past me at something in the distance. I raised my rifle to my shoulder and lined him in my sights. It took at least 5 seconds to take careful aim. My first shot was a little bit off and hit him in the right chest. He groaned, went down. I wanted to make sure he was finished, so I fired a second shot, aimed halfway between his hip and shoulder. He was crawling on the ground. I jerked the shot and hit him in the knee. He raised his head and groaned again. My third shot almost missed and hit him in the butt. He never moved again. 5 minutes later, after I shot Paxton, I was drinking a beer and had blocked out all thoughts of what I just done out of my mind. I thought no more of shooting Paxton than shooting a bottle at the dump. I know you hate my guts, and rightfully so. I think about Jamie every hour of the day, as I am sure you do. Don't feel bad about not solving this case. You could interview till doomsday everyone that Jamie Paxton ever met in his life, and you wouldn't have a clue to my identity. With no motive, no weapon, and no witnesses, You could not possibly solve this crime, the murder of Jamie Paxton. Wow. He wrote that, like, damn. So the FBI's profile, the letter didn't bring any outbreaks or anything in the case, but they sent down an FBI profiling team called the Hannibal Lecter Squad of 3 personalities to spearhead the team. So the profile just described him as an educated white male and someone with a propensity for crimes such as arson, killing pets, and farm animals. The profile wasn't perfect. It predicted that the killer lived within a short distance of all the crimes. Dillon, he lived far away as 150 miles, and the murderer would be in his 20s. Dillon, but he was 42 when he was arrested. He might be a normal family man, but was likely a loner. The report continued, has a drinking problem and a history of compulsive vandalism. Stress would trigger the shootings, which usually would be committed while he was drunk. So the first break. In August 26, 1992, high school friend of Dillon, Richard Fry, 43, calls the Tuscarawas West County detective called Detective Sergeant Walter Wilson. After being disturbed by his preoccupation with serial killers and animal killings, this finally broke the cold case. Fry had read the August 11, 1992 report in the newspaper about the case and the FBI profile. Several days before, Fry had called the FBI number listed in various newspaper stories about the murders. He left a message on an answering machine when the FBI didn't return his calls. He retried the county sheriff's department. He said, "I'd like to meet with you. I saw the reports about the task force that had been formed to solve the killings, and I just think I got a guy who should be investigated as a possible suspect." The man was nervous about coming into the station, so Will the detective agreed to meet him at a private location outside of town later that day. By then, the Southeastern Ohio Homicide Task Force had received many tips and none panned out. So Detective Wilson was initially skeptical, believing that Fry's story about Dillon looked like another dead end. Fry said in 1993, he asked me if I thought he could or had killed somebody. The way he looked at me chilled my blood. I thought he had a secret to tell. It was a look on his face and in his eyes. Fry and Dillon met in junior year at former Glenwood High School in Blaine Township. As teenagers, they would drive to the countryside, taking shots at road signs and animals, as well as lighting random fires. Dillon began getting more violent and cruel by shooting family pets they came across. Fry read about the killings, and he knew Dillon liked to drive around those same areas at weekends in his car. He knew Dillon had weapons and had shot and killed animals. He felt Dillon was the type of person who could do something like this. Fry recounted, "I used to go out hunting with him because we were gun enthusiasts. In the beginning, it was pretty legitimate, but then we started hitting these dumps in southern Stark County. We go down there hunting rats and things. I remember we ran into a couple of scraggly dogs one time. They were all diseased. They were sick. I remember they had open sores. Tom said, 'Do you think I ought to kill them?' And I said, 'Well, you'd probably be doing them a favor.' I remember him shooting them. I didn't think too much about it. Wild dogs can be vicious. Then he started shooting dogs, just dogs along the road. I said, 'Tom, shooting a wild dog is one thing, but that dog doesn't look very wild to me.' He said, 'You can't let them damn things be running around.' I let it go by one. I let it go by once or twice, but then I said, 'Tom, you got to quit it, or I won't go out with you. Those are somebody's pets. Somebody loves them. It's just not right.'" Richard also said that while driving back from Atwood Lake in Carroll County, Tom pulled off on the side of the road and pulled out his gun and started shooting at this farmer. The farmer was a good way off, 200-300 yards. One of the others in the cars protested, "What the hell are you doing?" Dillon explained that he couldn't hit a target at a distance with a pistol, So I'm just blinking at him, he said. Yo, this guy is wild for this. So after the school days, Fry ran into Dillon at the newcomers den in Southern County. This was the first time I'd spoken to him in a long time. I said, "What in the world are you doing clear down here?" He said, "Oh, just driving around, this and that." Richard didn't believe him. When I saw him in Newcomerstown, I thought he was moving farther south because he's still up to his old ways. Despite his suspicions, Fry renewed their friendship with Dillon in 1989, partly to their common interest in firearms. Fry said they moved the Ohio Gun Collectors Association, the gun show, up to the Cleveland, and I wasn't a member. Dillon invited him to be his guest. He said he had stopped killing animals, so I said, "I guess we can be friends again." The gun shows were held 5 or 6 times a year, and on the long drives together, Dillon and Richard would talk guns, hunting, and in some cases, serial killers. Dillon talked about how easy murder would be. I remember one time, this was after like the murders, by the way, so how spooky is this? Like Fry's with him in the cars, and this guy's like boasting, like, yo, like, let's talk about serial killers. So anyways, Dillon says this is how easy it would be murder. I remember one time he and I were driving. He said, "Do you realize you can go out into the country and find somebody and there are no witnesses? You can shoot them, there is no motive. Do you realize how easy murder would be to get away with?" I said, "Yeah, but why would you do it?" "What the?" On a trip to a gun show, Dillon asked a more disturbing question. Fry said, "We were talking about Florida serial killer Ted Bundy and how a guy can get away with it all." Tom said, "Do you think I ever killed somebody?" The question really caught me off guard. I said, "No, I don't think so." Dillon repeated the question. The way he said that to me was really scary. The informant remembered. I'd never seen him like that before. I thought to myself, has anybody been shot? So here's some other suspicious evidence. So Tom, Dillon's co-workers and neighbors were interviewed by members of the investigating task force. One co-worker who said he had known Dillon for 20 years said Dillon's nickname was Killer because he often bragged about shooting dogs and cats. The co-worker was a Second City employee, described Dillon as a loner. He did not have a good relationship with his wife. The co-workers also provided a possible link between Dillon and the murders of the Outdoorsman. Dillon kept maps on his tables and filing cabinets of many of the east central Ohio counties where the killings occurred. A second enticing link was established when Dillon's history of firearms purchase showed he had bought numerous weapons from a co-worker who had a federal firearms dealer's license. So the dealer records show Dillon bought 18 weapons in the last several years, including 4 .30 caliber type rifles and 2 Mausers, and the kind used to kill 4 of the 5 victims. Wow. Alright, so the link to Tom, Dillon, and surveillance begins. So the first clue linking Dillon to the crime was that his weekends and vacation time matched the date of the killings. September 20, 1992, neighbors saw a red Toyota. That's not the actual picture of his car, but it's like similar to that, by the way. So a neighbor sees a red Toyota pickup truck near the spot where the dog was killed in Tuscarawas County. A 25 caliber bullet was removed from the dog, and Richard Fry sorry, I think my computer just froze for a second. So this was the 25 caliber bullet that was removed from the dog. And Richard Fry told Detective Wilson that Dillon owned a similar gun. Wilson, who had been trailing Dillon alone for several weeks, had enough to get the go-ahead for the round-clock surveillance. So the county sheriff, Harold McKimmey, and Wilson's preliminary were convinced the other task force members that Dillon was a viable suspect. From So what Detective Kimmy said from early on, I felt strongly about him. He appeared to be your everyday guy, but underneath the surface he was not. Beginning in mid-October, the task force tailed Dillon from the air and on the ground to the gun shows and on weekend trips to Belmont, Harrison, Tuscarawas, Holmes, Coshocton, and Carroll counties. He was often seen drinking from early in the morning. November 8, aerial surveillance saw Dillon stop several times and point what appeared to be a gun at electric meters on oil well pumps and a stop sign. Dillon also stopped next to a car with a for sale sign on it and picked up a large rock and threw it through the windshield. On November 11th, task force members lost sight of Dillon on his way home from Belmont County. Later, they learned that 2 cows had been killed with a crossbow. In Tuscarawas County, Richard Fry helped obtain several of Dillon's arrows and matched those found at the dead cows. November 21, the team followed Dillon to a gun show in New Philadelphia where he bought a .22 caliber rifle. The purchase of that gun was a .25 caliber handgun at the gun show in Cleveland on November 7th was enough to arrest Dillon for violating his plea bargain on the silencer charge. But FBI has still no direct evidence to link him to the 5 killings. Dillon was spotted visiting Kevin Loring's grave. In Massachusetts, Dillon told police after his arrest, "When I went to New England last year with my wife, I looked up on the microfilm in the Plymouth library where the guy lived and everything. He was from the Duxbury area. I just read, to see who the hell he was. I didn't know who he was." Despite the surveillance, Dillon attempted to kill Larry Aller in Tuscarawas County, but he missed. And Aller escaped uninjured. In November 1992, around 9 a.m. on a remote Harrison County road, an FBI surveillance plane with Detective Sergeant Walter Wilson on board was following Dillon's red Toyota pickup truck. Dillon, already drunk on beer ahead of the truck, was a T intersection and near it a female jogger. She turned right. Fortunately, Dillon turns left. Okay, so his arrest comes. As hunting season approached, the surveillance team decided to move in and stop any further killings. Dillon arrested November 27, 1992. After nearly 6 weeks of surveillance as he left the convenience store in Tuscarawas County, they arrested him on federal weapons charge on November 27, 1992. As he was awaiting sentencing for possessing a silencer and announced that he was their suspect in the serial shootings. At a press conference, they asked anyone who had sold firearms to Dillon to come forward with any evidence. December 4th, 1992, a gun dealer from Stark County brought in a Swedish Mauser rifle that he said Dillon had sold to him on April 6, 1992. At a Massillon gun show the day after Bradley was murdered, ballistic test indicated that it was the rifle used to kill Bradley and Hawkins. On Jan 27, 1993, Dillon gets indicted on capital charges in both cases. Searches of Dillon's home and vehicles failed to turn up either firearms or other evidence linking him to the murders. Authorities believe Dillon could be responsible for many of the reported 108 arsons of barns and abandoned houses since 1988. Dillon's family members shocked by his arrest. His mother-in-law, a retired high school teacher and guidance counselor, refused to believe her son-in-law was capable of murder. Dillon is a witty, kind man who has always had a yen for guns, she said. Even though she refused to believe initial allegations against him, she said, "If they are true, they are true. My stomach is churning. I have to keep my spirits up for Kathy, her daughter." Maybe part of me wants to deny this. Tom was always pleasant. He was joking, seemed like a son to me. We were a very close-knit family. Clearly not. So on court, February 9th, 1993, he arrives at the courthouse. The proceeding is short. He pleads not guilty to the murder charges of Gary Bradley and Cloud Hawkins. A third murder charge filed against Dillon on May 22, 1993 July 2nd, 93, he enters his plea before Judge John Now in Noble County. He shows no emotion as he answers guilty to each charge. Dillon admitted to setting 100, and he admits to setting 106 fires and committing other acts of vandalism in eastern Ohio. Within the 5 years, Noble County Sheriff Smith estimated that Dillon's fires caused more than $2 million in damages. Fires that were set in multiple counties. Wow. So, in return for the state dropping the death penalty specifications, Dillon pleaded guilty to 5 counts of murder and was sentenced to 5 consecutive life terms with no chance of parole for 165 years on July 12, 1993. Dillon said, "I have major problems. I'm crazy. I want to kill. I want to kill." He blamed a turbulent childhood for his problems. Wow. Dillon also said he was afraid to be sent to Southern Ohio Correctional Facility in Lucasville, a maximum security, and the site of a riot just a few years before he was caught. In response to his concerns, family members of his victims began a petition to have him send him there. More than 8,000 Ohioans signed the petitions, which the state of Ohio honored. Damn, shout out to state of Ohio for honoring that, and wow, and shout out to the people for coming together. 7 o'clock the next night after the sentencing, Paxton's telephone rang. It was Thomas Dillon. He told Gene Paxton that her pathetic coward comment had hurt him. "That's what you are, Thomas," she replied, "and if you start with your cocky attitude, I will hang up. I've heard enough of that for the past several months. I'm not interested in what you have to say, but there are things I want you to know. Thomas, have you ever heard of the expression, tears are the safety valve of the heart?" He had not, so she talked about repentance and prayer. "Quit your profanity, stop the loopy, simpering in front of the cameras, and pick up the Bible before it's too late." She said. Paxton continued, speaking to him for an hour, finally concluding, "We have spoken long enough. I can't hate you, but I can never forgive you for what you've done to our lives." Wow. So psychiatrist Jeffrey Smalden, who examined Dillon at the request of his defense attorneys at their trial, said, "What you see is someone who looks and presents in a way that seems frighteningly normal. And the reality is that most people who commit crimes like Dillon come across that way. You never would have picked them out of a crowd. He was married with a son. College education, worked 22 years. Everyone knew that Dillon liked to hunt. They didn't know what he was hunting." In his confession, he said that he shot his first victim 13 years earlier, a man sitting at home watching TV. So this guy with his picture, so this is what Dillon says. "So this guy with his back to the picture window of his house was sitting on the sofa. So this thought came to me," he said, "stop, back up, and shoot this guy. So I shot him through the picture window. This sort of voice in my head said, 'Go back and get him. Go back and get him.' I took my rifle, went down there, jumped the guardrail, and went down to the pine tree and shot him in the back." But this voice was Dillon's voice. When the psychiatrist asked him, about that, he finally admitted, "Well, it wasn't any other voice. I know it was mine. It was my own voice in my own head." Smalden said that he was living in a fantasy world of his own creation. He talked about various fantasy roles that he had envisioned himself in over the years. They ran from the gamut from being president of the United States to being a leader singer for the Doors, Beatles, to being brought out of retirement by the Cleveland Browns to lead his team to the Super Bowl. But they were all linked by this theme of power, prestige, influence, and grandiosity. Grandiosity. I don't know how to pronounce that, my bad, guys. Now, he always found that his fantasy life has much of a darker component than the example that I've cited. Certain of his fantasies involve himself as a combatant in a war situation. this guy was actually like wild. So like he's arrested. It's all good. Um, that's it for this video. Let me know what you guys think about this one. Honestly, I want to ask you guys this. Do you guys think a serial killer is born or is a serial killer made? Let me know what you guys think in the comments. I'm curious to hear what your opinions are. I personally think they are kind of, it's 50-50. You know, it's like, it's a lot about their childhood and how they're brought up. I think everybody has these traits in us to become one, but it's how we hone, how we grow up, and how we hone our skills, and how we are treated as children. Because like children, preteens, and like young adults, that's when we are mostly influenced in our lives. But then there's also a percentage that I think it's just we're born with it. You know, we're born with it. You know, like. So I'm curious to hear what you guys think about that one. I know this is a long video. Thank you if you stayed all the way. I appreciate every single one of you guys. Please leave a like, comment, subscribe, and thank you. I will post more, and I really appreciate every single one.